Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Welcome back to the Great Women in Compliance podcast with Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley. I'm Mary Shirley, and today we're completing our series with Debbie Sabatini Hennelly on previous topics that we discussed, which were to do with psychological safety, resilience during burnout, and the broader topic of how these items affect culture. And today we're going to continue that conversation. And the first question that I have for you, Debbie, is regarding a book. So you published a book not so long ago. It's not a compliance textbook or a compilation of stories like Sending the Elevator Back Down, but it does include words of wisdom. What was the concept for this book?
Well, thanks for asking, Mary. You know, it is funny. I have been working on a book for several years now about it's sort of an unofficial roadmap to surviving and thriving in our profession. And I always thought that would be my first book. But the book that I put together is really the result of my work on recovering from my own burnout. So, gosh, I guess it's about 5 years ago now that I realized I needed to get centered and to sort of put my own oxygen mask on first, as they say on the planes, and help myself be the best I could be by first taking care of me and not trying to be solving everyone's problems, saying yes to all the client or prospective clients. You know, there's only so much one can do in a day, and the things that are important to me mean I have to choose where I'm going to focus my time. And in fact, one of the things that I needed to focus on was that, and in fact, this is sort of my New Year's resolution, do less, finish more. So that sort of came out of my burnout recovery self-therapy plan. And the plan actually started with me teaching myself that I needed to learn to meditate. I knew a lot of the techniques. I know how to do the breathing and, you know, being mindful and trying to just be in the moment and so forth. But I really couldn't seem to keep the racing thoughts in my head, the to-do list that's, you know, always pinned to my brain, to quiet down. And so I learned to do maybe 10 minutes of the meditation and the breathing. And then I decided, well, there are other ways one can be mindful and kind of step back from the work and the commitments and the expectations. And so I turned to creativity. I think I consider myself a very creative person. And I do think, in fact, I say in the introduction to my book, that because I am left-handed and right-brained, there's probably a lot to be said for my being able to escape from the pressures of the daily work by being creative. That's that part of my brain. So I pulled out my paints and my colored pencils and my camera. I love doing photography. I'm far from, pro at it. But I also was pulling out the books, the self-help books and the poetry. And I actually do love to write poetry. And started each day with, okay, I do my meditation, and then I'm going to spend 30 minutes or so doing something creative. And I started, I suppose, as sort of an accountability habit, I started sharing with a few friends, just an email. Here's what I'm doing this morning. Here's the quote. Here's the photograph. Here's the thing I painted, whatever it was. And then I got brave enough to post in Facebook. Facebook, I guess, was first. And I was getting some nice feedback, and people were actually looking forward to it, because the way I learned this was because I'd made a habit of doing it, when I stopped it, I would have friends reach out and say, hey, I usually have my coffee and read your post. What happened to your post? And so, okay, I better really stick with this. And then I got even braver and posted them in LinkedIn, which for me, because I had been separating my, whole self, if you will, from the piece of myself that I was sharing in LinkedIn with articles and so forth. I think that may have also contributed to the burnout, making a separation between your work and the rest of you takes energy. And in my book, in my mind, that's energy that could be going into bringing your whole self to what you're doing. So I started posting in LinkedIn, where I have lots of contacts, lots of connections who'd never seen that side of me. And I got really great feedback. And then some of my friends were saying, hey, it'd be great if these were in a book. And I should describe, I know you've seen them, but for people listening who haven't, each day I was posting one of my black and white photos with a quote that I felt was sort of illustrated by the photo. And the quote would be in color and the photo was in black and white. And then I would say a little something about what that thought of the day was. And I did this for about 2 years, two and a half years. This was all pre-COVID. And then decided, okay, my friends think I should make a book. I made a book. I did it self-published as a Kindle book, Amazon self-publishing. And then, of course, heard from several friends that they meant what they called a real book. So that's the one you've seen recently. It's now been released as a paperback, and it's called Presence in Chaos, 365 Mindful Moments. And each page has one of these posts. I took a year's worth of the 2.5 years that I thought were the best. And there's a little space on each page for the reader to jot their own thoughts down. And so that's my first book. It's not the Surviving and Thriving as a Ethics and Compliance Professional, but that book will come. It was just very important to me to share. And the beginning of the book has an introduction about how the book came to life, why I thought it was important to talk about my burnout publicly, and that I hope I can help other people find a way to see the importance of being present and being there, not just for yourself, but for the people that you love and the people that you serve. Because the one resource we have, all of us have, is our time, and how we choose to share it is a gift. So that's sort of the premise of the book. And thanks for asking.
That sounded fantastic, and I can't wait to see the Surviving and Thriving book come out, because I think that would be very well received by our community in compliance. There is a lot to it, certainly to keep you going and keep you on your toes. I think you gave some really nice advice about those times when you're full of overwhelm, and particularly when you're trying to get to sleep at night, it can be troubling to have all of those thoughts coming to you. And one of the practical things that I've taken up doing in those situations is keeping a pen and paper beside the bed. Although I guess those of you who are a bit more technical than me, you might just use your notes app on your phone. But what I found is that, if there's something that I'm thinking, I must get to that, or, that this is a good idea, or I don't want to forget this, write it down so that you don't, even if it means turning your lights on for a moment just to get it down, to give your brain that quiet. And if there's something bothering you, I've taken to telling myself, excellent, you will have dedicated time to deal with that tomorrow, and look at the calendar and make sure. And then I find that helps me go, okay, I don't need to deal with this now. I've given myself permission. Put it down and know that I'm going to pick it up again. It will be looked at, but it doesn't have to be picked up now at 11 p.m. when I have meetings with Germany first thing in the morning.
Exactly. Right. Well, and we do, as we talked about earlier when we were talking about psychological safety and moral injury, we deal with a lot in this profession. A lot that's hard to do, hard to hear. advice that sometimes is difficult to give and difficult for people to receive. And so there's an awful lot of emotional and psychological energy involved in what we do. And even listening to people's concerns takes energy, right? I mean, it's in many ways, it's like doing social work. And so we need to make sure that we're replenishing the auxiliary tank of energy so that we can do it again tomorrow. So I think your advice is great. I love that idea. I love it. I just recently started using the to-do. I guess it's part of Microsoft, right? That's where I plunk my ideas down. So it's a task. Nice. It's there, and tomorrow I'll put it on the calendar somewhere. But at least that's where it is. And so I love your advice. It's
thank you for that.
So important. It's so important to get it out of our heads. Right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I know that you've been doing work in the ESG area, and as you mentioned in part 1 of this series, you spent time earlier in your career as an environmental lawyer. So unlike many people who are touting that they are ESG experts, you actually are legitimately an ESG expert and have been doing this for some time. So based on that, I'd love to hear, what are you seeing clients grappling with right now across the board, and how do you suggest solving or addressing some of the issues that are topical in the ESG space right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. As you know, we put together, my company, Resility, put together a couple of summits in 2021 to try to address exactly what you're asking. And, as simple as, what is ESG? Why should I care? And how do I do my part to help my company or my firm or my organization get our arms around this in a way that's right-sized for us? And so, and I should say, all of those materials from those summits are available on the Resility website. So I would say, one of the things that we see organizations grappling with starts at the very top, starts at the board level. And in fact, I recently spoke in one of the regional NACD corporate directors conferences with others who were helping boards get their arms around these issues. And I think for some board members, it really might be as simple as, I don't know what it is, and I don't want to sound ignorant. And so I'm going to sort of keep my distance from this. I mean, it's out there. But what's also good to remind board directors is that their role in oversight is all about things that touch on environment, social responsibility, and governance already. So you're already all over this. It's just that the perspectives that we're now bringing to these issues, these risks, these opportunities, has this umbrella over them that ties them together in a sort of holistic way. So, for example, many companies have been dealing with social responsibility commitments for many years, right? And others or some of the same, and others have been doing work in sustainability for many years. I mean, my earliest work as an environmental engineer and lawyer was in that space. So, and that's, 100 years ago. So let's not be afraid that this is something new and scratching our heads about, how am I going to take on yet another thing? For board directors, I say, you're already dealing with a lot of this. It's just that now we need to help take a more inclusive look at the risk areas and opportunities that you're used to looking at, and seeing them through the eyes of a broader set of stakeholders. So not just focusing on what do the shareholders think, but they are but one set of shareholders among many that have impact on the future of our organization. Another big group of stakeholders are our employees, without whom we wouldn't have a company. We wouldn't have an organization. So what our employees think is very important, and what they care about, and their ideas about innovation and being competitive and addressing the interests of our customers, another stakeholder group that's important. Some of the best ideas can come from the most, forgotten places in an organization. I know that in my environmental roles, some of the best solutions to environmental problems came from gathering people together who had different roles, thinking about, doing a root cause analysis on whatever the issue was, but thinking about how it happened and thinking about how we could fix it. Just because you're the senior most person in the room doesn't mean you have all the answers or that you should have all the answers. So same goes at the board level. Sometimes the best thing we can do at very senior levels on any of these, this goes for the risk areas we cover in ethics and compliance, but in any of these E, S, or G areas, we need people asking good questions. So we need people asking, so what is it? And what are we doing? And how does this impact us? And why should I care? Maybe not so directly, but help me understand how this connects to our long-term growth, how it connects to our business strategy. If you have board directors asking those questions, then the CEO and others in the C-suite will ask those questions. And everyone can kind of turn to those who know maybe more granular details. Then we're getting a, top down and ground up understanding of how our environmental footprint in the world impacts our communities, our customers, what regulators think, what our employees think, how our diversity profile, how our compensation disparity from CEO to factory floor, how all of these perspectives impact the long-term resilience of the organization. Those answers don't just come from the top or from consultants or law firms. They come from, in my opinion, they come from within the organization first. So what we see organizations grappling with is, what is it? Why should I care? How do we get our arms around this? How do we not get run over by what's going on in the regulator world, in the NGO world, in the media? And so, unfortunately, what can happen is a reactive approach rather than a strategic, proactive approach. So, do you want me to go into some of the ways we can be proactive?
Sure.
Okay. So, from an ethics and compliance professional's view, I think it's very helpful if we take stock in the fact that we're already touching a lot of the areas that fall under this umbrella, right? Think about all the things that, when you see the lists of topics under E and S and G, I think everyone will see that some part of our compliance program is dealing with a lot of them.
Right.
We may not be dealing with them in a way that takes into consideration these broader stakeholder views that I'm talking about. But, thinking about how the organization's decisions or choices might impact all of these different stakeholder groups, not just shareholders, is I think, the most important part of developing a strategy, an ESG strategy. And I think we do that quite well in ethics and compliance with our risk assessment and risk management approaches, right? Certainly by taking a management system approach to implementing our strategy, that applies to implementing a business strategy and helping see the connections between compliance risks, ethical risks, reputational risks, and the business. That's what we already do. So we can turn our risk assessment process into a risk and opportunity identification process. And I think the best way to do that is for us to learn to see how the business strategy is intended to roll out, and then to helping the business understand where there might be obstacles to that strategy succeeding. So, those risks are, many of them might be compliance risks, but others maybe aren't as easily quantifiable as compliance risks. And so thinking about what competitors are doing, thinking about what regulators have on the drawing board. So there are, for example, there are frameworks that we're seeing come out of the EU, right? Maybe the SEC hasn't gotten around yet to being very clear about what they would be looking for, but we can certainly take our cues from Europe. There's no reason to sit and wait for a regulator to tell us what to do. An organization knows better than any regulator what its potential to address risks might be if we look broadly enough.
I think that's really sensible, and had more organizations done that in light of GDPR, they would have been less shocked and panicked when the CCPA came into force here. And of course, that's only going to spread the state-by-state data privacy, and then eventually a federal data privacy law. And so if you look to Europe, if you look to other countries, New Zealand,
Australia,
data privacy regimes in place for decades now. It's such an easy cue, right? Like the wheel can only be reinvented so much when it comes to these legal requirements. So
true. And if you start out in reactive mode, then you're not thinking, okay, so here's what I'm seeing out there are the expectations, right? Oh, let me come up with a proactive, right-sized way to do this here. Then you're focusing your energy in a way that is best for your organization. And then when the regulators start talking about things, you can actually participate in those conversations, right? That's something we did, right? In the early, I would say in the mid 90s, when EPA here was talking about recycling, and we were very involved. I was at the time at AT&T and involved in the Electronic Industries Association. We were talking directly with regulators about what's possible, things they weren't even thinking were possible that we knew we could do. So first, find common ground. I mean, this is, I think, the way good leaders take on challenges. Find common ground. So the common ground is we want to live on a planet that is not going to, burn up in, loss of the ozone, as we would say back then. Okay, we want a planet that exists for our children and our grandchildren. There's common ground, right? We want to make sure that our company is being a good neighbor, right? So taking away the black hat, white hat aspect of these conversations and bringing, the great intellect in all of the parties to the table to solve these complex challenges, like we did back in the days of how do we reclaim, recycle batteries? Let's not have batteries go into landfills. I mean, it can be as simple as, well, ask us instead of commanding and controlling us, regulator, right? So I think the same goes here. Bringing together all of the various interested parties to any big issue, and having. So let's talk first about doing it within a company. If we have, in the ESG context, investor relations and PR and government affairs talking about our ESG commitments without connecting to what's going on internally? Is it possible, right? Not just, oh, we're going to do what the competitors are doing, but is it possible for us to do?
Otherwise
right?
you get greenwashing.
Exactly. And so greenwashing is, simply stated, is a gap between what you say you're going to do and what you're actually doing. Well, that's risk assessment and risk management in ethics and compliance, right? We have our values, we have our policies, we have our code. Are we being who we say we are? That's exactly the analysis I would apply to ESG. And in fact, when all eyes are looking at ESG reports and sustainability reports, then it's important as ethics and compliance professionals to say to our colleagues, hey, before we go out there waving the flag on one part of ESG, like our sustainability plan, they'll take a look at the things in the S and the G buckets and make sure our ducks are in a row, because people will start looking. And I think this is what we've seen with a number of companies who are out there with great sustainability plans. And then, all you have to do is scratch the surface and you see they've had some diversity issues, or they've had some Me Too issues. And those issues are just as important to customers and employees, some customers, some employees. And so let's make sure before we're out there talking about what we're going to do on one part of ESG, that we know how we would measure ourselves on the other parts, because you're attracting scrutiny. So,
exactly.
So you want it to be right-sized, risk-based, just like what we do in ethics and compliance. And the other piece I would say is, we bring cross-functional collaboration to so much of what we do in ethics and compliance. That is essential for creating a good ESG strategy, right? Because all of the risk areas that we touch on, we're not all subject matter experts on all of those things. Yet, we have no problem, or should have no problem, convening a conversation with the subject matter experts in-house or from outside to help us create a good compliance management plan or a good code of conduct or whatever. So why not do the same thing with ESG? We don't have to own ESG. I think that we've been seeing a lot of conversation in our profession about, we already have enough on our plates and we're not qualified. And I beg to differ because I don't think the right question is, should we be leading it as ethics and compliance professionals? Does ESG need a single point of accountability? Absolutely. Does it have to be the chief ethics and compliance officer? No. But we should be a player. We should be, in a RACI chart, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. We should at least be an R. We should be a responsible party. We can we can invite people to the table and say, hey, we think that, a proactive approach, a risk assessment, proactive approach, and a management system approach is a great way to make sure our strategy gets implemented. But we need all the right people at the table, and we need everybody who's at the table to bring these different stakeholder perspectives. So the people who know customers best should be in that conversation. The people who know what we're capable of in, R&D, or the people who know what we're doing in lobbying. I mean, that's a huge exposure if you're talking about what a great environmental corporate citizen you are in your sustainability plan, and then in your lobbying plan, you're undoing that reputation by lobbying against certain environmental regulations, right? They need to be consistent. What we're saying, out of one side of our company or organization has to be consistent. That political corporate responsibility another big piece of ESG, and that should be part of the conversation. So I think we have a lot we can bring, right? We have lots of tools in our toolkit. We do not have to lead it, but we should definitely be at the table.
Yeah, I agree, and I love the taking a proactive stance on it, because if you think about our wider conversation about burnout, whenever you're acting reactively, you're always on the back foot, right? You're always one step behind because you're chasing to catch up to meet, the regulator guidelines or deadlines that are being put in place, which is what we saw on the data protection side. So if you're taking a proactive response, it's likely to be better for you from a burnout perspective later on.
So true. And also it gives you the ability to bring some sort of process, framework, steps A, B, C, like how are we going to do this? If you take the time rather than reacting. One of my favorite frameworks, I have to give credit to one of my great mentors, Roger Steer, who created the ethical leadership program that we rolled out at BP I guess it was almost 10 years ago now, 9 or 10 years ago. Roger has this very simple framework that fits with the acronym RIGHT, R-I-G-H-T. First, R is there a rule that applies to what we're doing? So in this case, with so much of ESG, well, maybe there's not a rule, but there are standards. There are some at least reporting standards. Okay, but so much of the decision-making is really still not yet proscribed. So, okay, I means, can we make a decision with integrity? And I'm paraphrasing, but I'm close because I've been doing this for 10 years. In that part of our decision, we have to ask ourselves if the choices that are in front of us are all consistent with the values of the organization.
Right.
Right. And if they're not, they're off the table. So we winnow down our possible decisions to, I'm not going to do something that violates the values, even if in the short term, it's going to make, the shareholders happy, even if it's going to help me make the numbers this month. If it's inconsistent with the values, it's off the table. So the G and the H are good and harm, are about looking at impacts on groups. Now we would call them stakeholders, right? Who's going to benefit or who's going to be potentially harmed by the choices in front of me.
Right.
And this is where sometimes we get one part of a company making a decision that's maybe good for their goals and objectives that maybe undermines somebody else's goals and objectives. So, when you have a broader look at stakeholders, you can see all of the good and all of the harm. And T is, I think for Roger, it's truth, but I think it's also transparency. And this is the way I would say it. If I explained my decision to my mom, to my aunt, to my, best friend who's not in this field, would they understand why it was a good decision? Why I thought it was a good decision? More importantly, would I be embarrassed or would I be proud of how I got to it? And I think, sort of the transparency part of it is where we sometimes can trip ourselves up, particularly as lawyers. We think we have the answer. And this happens also at, the engineer part of me, I think can own this too. We like to solve problems. We have an answer. We maybe don't run it through RIGHT. We know it's right. We know it's ethical. We know it meets the values, even if we stop there. Being transparent about how we got it, two heads are better than one, bouncing our decision off of someone else can never hurt, right? It's either going to confirm we made a good decision or maybe it's going to help us see that we missed something. There was a blind spot, right? And, I think too often we're quick to come up with solutions or programs or rules or policies or whatever without without considering the people who have to live with them, implement them. And so being transparent about how you got there and seeking input in your decision-making process, I think is always going to help you make a better decision, which I guess, that's partly my ESG approach, but it's really a broader ethical leadership approach. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And as a leadership consultant, I'm interested to hear your best one-sentence advice for being a legendary leader.
Well, gosh, one sentence. I would say that begin with the end in mind is, I think I need two sentences.
Go for it.
Maybe a semicolon. Begin with the end in mind, meaning keep your goal in mind. But don't justify what you do based on where you're going, because rethinking your assumptions is an important part of being a good leader. So begin with the end in mind is good, but I think the better part, and of course that's borrowed from Stephen Covey, 7 Habits. What I really have taken to heart over the years as a leader is seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And I think, when I've had issues with people in the past, where I think they're not understanding me, or where I think they're coloring outside the lines, and I need to advise them on how to come back inside the lines, trying to understand their why. Why are they, what's motivating them? Seeking to understand somebody else before asking them to understand you is kind of like extending trust before wanting their trust. And so I think that has served me well. I think it serves anybody well who wants to lead, because that works whether you're leading, up, down, across, we lead from wherever we are. And I think understanding the people who we support, people who we work for. This is certainly what we do as consultants is, before explaining to the client how we can fix their problem, we have to understand so begin with the end in mind, right? What's their goal? But how did this problem come to be? What's important to them? And how can we help them succeed?
Yeah. And what about your best advice for anyone who needs to manage upwards? So when your boss, supervisor, or someone otherwise more senior to you is lacking in some way and it's affecting you negatively, or you really want to help them improve, what should you do?
I have had a lot more experience with this issue than I wish I had to have. I think we touched on this a little bit in the moral injury part of our conversation, on and offline. But I think the best way to deal with, let's say, a difficult boss is, again, to try to understand why they're so difficult. What is it that's motivating them? And I don't mean be their therapist. I mean, actually ask them what their goals and objectives are and how you can support them. And if their behavior is getting in the way of that, then asking for permission to give feedback is helpful. But I really think you can kind of come at it obliquely. And that is, here's how I think I can help you achieve your success. And that's important to me. And, I perhaps we're not communicating directly. Maybe I'm not hearing you, but I think that what I can do to help you succeed is, ABC. But help me help you. Is that, I think I'm quoting Jerry Maguire. Right. So no one turns down help. if you pose it the right way. Likewise, I think it's important to be able to ask anyone we work for to support us. And I think, certainly any good leader has as one of their key goals developing a succession plan, right? Surrounding themselves with people who are smart and capable and creative, and then giving them room to come up with ideas that we wouldn't come up with ourselves, and to help them grow as leaders, because no one's going to be around forever. So I think part of dealing with a difficult boss is trying to understand how they're thinking about that succession plan, if they're thinking about it at all, and how maybe you can work together to make sure they have that kind of a plan. They have a problem-solving approach that makes them successful by making sure everyone on the team is successful, bringing their strengths, bringing their skills, feeling connected. I think it's really all about influence, even with difficult people. Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. I think think like a consultant. Some of this is really analogous to the hero's journey. And I think, Joseph Campbell has written about this, but the idea that the hero in any story is going to come up against obstacles, and sometimes a guide can help them go around, go over, dig through, whatever it is, that obstacle, to eventually, on their journey, get to where they want to be, right? So in some ways, we have to be the guide for even the difficult boss who's the hero in their story. We might be certainly the hero in our own story, but in our role as ethics and compliance professionals, I think we also can remind the maybe people who have some blind spots about our mission, our remit in this, is to remind them that we're the guides for the business or the organization. And, who in the business are we together, you difficult boss and me and the rest of the team, who are we guides for, so that we maybe can reframe the focus back on the organization's strategy, back on the leadership goals and objectives, so that instead of having, the saber pointed at me, I can help point. Saber's not good. Instead of having the laser focus, micromanaging me, for example, I can help that leader, my boss, be a better guide for the business and focus that laser on what's important for the organization we support.
Excellent.
I could talk about that part for hours, but we don't have hours. I'll make sure to put a chapter in my Survive and Thrive.
Exactly. That's at least a chapter's worth there.
Right. In many ways, this is what you did, you and Lisa, with sending the elevator back down, was gathering ideas like this that help us be better at what we do. And, there was I think a section on these kinds of tips that I think are very useful for everyone to go back and read.
Yeah. Thank you for the shout out there.
Yeah, sure. That's a wonderful book.
You've just accepted a role as an adjunct professor at Fordham University. It must take an awful lot of work to prepare for the classes, knowing that taking on this new responsibility would be fairly time-consuming and not a light lift. What was the thought process for your decision-making on landing on saying yes to this offer?
Well, as I've been told by many friends over the years, no one takes on being an adjunct for the money.
Yeah.
Right. Certainly for me, it's about giving back to a profession that's so dear to me. and helping to advance it by helping to grow the leaders of its future. And I was honored to be asked by Bob Mascola, who was the executive director of this program at Fordham Law School. The program on corporate ethics and compliance is a master's in legal studies. So the neat twist on this is I'm not teaching lawyers or future lawyers. I'm teaching people who are grown-ups in jobs doing this at night. Some of them have taken off to do this full time, but these are people who already are living in, the business world or in the regulatory framework, or, these are people who want to grow their career in compliance. And some of them aren't even in compliance yet. So it's a really rewarding, fulfilling feeling to help people understand why what we do is important to the organizations they're already supporting in other ways. Right? Giving them, so they do some reading, and then when we're together for the class, we bring that reading into the discussion. And it's wonderful to help them think through how to solve problems. As I have said to you before, I love doing, applying what we learn to scenarios and role playing. And so almost every week, I ask them to pretend that they are the chief ethics and compliance officer of an organization that's grappling with, or has just had a headline, or whatever the topic is that we're talking about. And this is the Capstone Course of their program. So they're all about to graduate, and they've had courses in some really wonderful deep dive topics from from some wonderful adjunct professors. What this course does is sort of it's like a buffet. Each week we talk about a different topic. And so, 1 week we talked about the psychological safety and corporate culture things that we talked about earlier. We're going to be talking about the role of the board of directors. We're going to be talking about tone at the top, tone in the middle, ESG, each week, different topic. And a big part of their grade is an independent study. And so what I've done in my one-on-ones with each of them is ask them to think about where they want to be in 3 years, 5 years, and pick a topic that they feel really passionate about and that they can write, because they have to write a sort of lengthy paper and give a presentation. Have it be something that really gets your mind turning, something that you could present in your current organization, you could use as something in an interview, as work product, or just in the networking that you're now doing in LinkedIn. When you can be part of the thought leadership in our profession, you're helping everyone advance. And so it's really, I'm so enjoying it. I'm a learner. I love seeing all of these learners rolling up their sleeves and digging into these issues and taking on the role that all of them want to have someday, right? There's no better way to learn than to apply it, try it on. And so I'm thrilled to be doing it. I wish I had done it sooner. And interesting. And I'm teaching it again next semester. And there are a lot of ideas that I got from the way we navigated these topics that I'm going to bring forward to next semester.
Super. Well, that's a very positive and happy point for us to end on for this series.
Thanks, Mary.
Debbie. Thank you so much for joining us, your time, your wisdom and expertise. And we will keep an eye out for book number 2.
Oh, thank you, Mary. I so enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for including me.
Same here. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.